Hey everybody, Dylan Bowman here, one of the founders of Freetrail and the host of the Freetrail podcast. Thank you for watching our video podcast. A couple of things before we get started. Number one, please do join Freetrail Pro, our great community for trail runners from around the world. There's a lot of great perks involved in that membership, and we would love to have you on board. Number two, a big thank you to our sponsors here in the video podcast. We don't do real commercial breaks, so I just want to give them a major shout out on the front end here. We have some discount codes in the show notes that you can take advantage of. Number one, Speedland, of course, the makers of the GS Tam, the shoe that bears the Freetrail logo on it, and a product that we worked on to bring to market in the spring of 2023. Our other annual partner is Gnarly Nutrition, makers of fantastic training and racing nutritional supplements that will really help you on your trail journey. We always have a third partner on the show that rotates throughout the year. So depending on who it is now, you can find a link and a discount code in the show notes for that partner as well. But a big thank you to the sponsors who do make our podcast possible. Number three, last but not least, we would really appreciate it while you're here to smash the subscribe button on the Freetrail YouTube channel. You can also click the bell icon to get notifications whenever we post new content. We are working very hard to keep you inspired, informed, and entertained here in the great sport of trail running. Thank you so much. Enjoy the show. Anyway, Anna Gibson, welcome to the podcast. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
And of course, we were just together in Mammoth last weekend for the Mammoth Trail Fest, where you again smashed it. A great fourth place finish in the 26K, part of the Golden Trail World Series. I'm a new fan of yours as of Broken Arrow earlier this season. So we'll talk all about sort of what you've been up to, but how you feeling now? Like whatever, it's been 5 days removed from your awesome fourth place in Mammoth.
I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like I just sort of started to come back to life. It always takes like a little bit of a delay for like the exhaustion and everything to hit, and for me to hit my low point, and then a couple more days to like start coming out the other side of that. So I feel like I've been reborn, which is exciting.
Good. I'm barely recovering from it, and all I did was sit around and talk all weekend. So can't imagine how you feel. Anyway, congratulations on that awesome result. We'll of course come around and talk about it a little bit later on, but I always start the show with a uniform question that I've already prompted you with earlier today. That is just what makes you, you. It's a fun way to get to know our guests on a more personal level. So tell us a little bit about Anna Gibson, your unique character traits, how they show up in your life.
Yeah, I love this question. I think the biggest thing that makes me, especially right now as an athlete and like this point in my life, is just taking sort of a multi-sport approach to being a high-level runner. And for me, that presents itself as biking and skiing, but I think it's just like a bigger sort of just a bigger concept of like there not being boundaries on what it means to be an elite level athlete. And I think I just want to break that down. Like you can do whatever you want. You get to make the rules for your career and for your life. So I'm just trying to kind of, live that into existence right now.
I love that so much. And Rod Farvard and I talked about that throughout race weekend during our broadcast. And we'll come back around to talking a little bit more in depth on that philosophy. But I love that you embody it. And I think a lot of people can learn from it. Again, we don't know each other super well. We met each other at Broken Arrow. What I do know about you is that you grew up in the Jackson Hole area of Wyoming, which is one of the great places on planet Earth for our listeners who have never been there. Tell us about your upbringing in the Tetons, what makes the place special, and maybe how it's shaped you as an athlete and as a human being.
Yeah, the Tetons are amazing, and Jackson is amazing. Definitely played a really big role in making me into like the athlete that I am and the person that I am. I mean, growing up, it was just like a small town and everyone kind of knew everyone else. And my parents had been there for a long time when I was born. So just had a lot of friends and like a really supportive community all growing up. And also just a lot of like super crusher athletes, like people just skiing crazy stuff. Lots of like really good cyclists, road bikers, mountain bikers, lots of good trail runners there. So I think it's just sort of a mecca for like outdoor sports. Like you can pretty much do anything you want to do there, which is really cool. So I'm grateful I found running, but you could go like 1,000 different directions.
How did your folks end up there, out of curiosity? Because I lived in Aspen for a long time, and obviously there's that mix between like the working class, like normal people, local population and then the, obscene wealth that comes in and, buys second homes and stuff. And obviously it's a tourist and resort destination that's world famous, but it's unique to grow up in that environment. How'd your folks end up there?
Yeah, my parents were fortunate to get in sort of before it went crazy. And they're a bit older, so they were in the valley like before everything sort of went insane with prices for properties and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm definitely like living off of their good timing, which is awesome. But they both were sort of dirtbags when they moved there, and they worked really hard. They owned a local bagel and coffee shop, and did that for pretty much my entire childhood for almost 20 years. So definitely more the working class, like dirtbag ski types, who are just fortunate to make it through. And yeah, they're still living a happy life there. I'm like, please never leave. I don't know if I'll ever be able to afford it without you.
Oh, that's so cool. And yeah, small business ownership and that type of a place. I have friends who are business owners in Aspen, like I said, and yeah, it's a great way to contribute to the local community and, also not easy at all. And I'm sure you had a front row seat to some of the trials and tribulations of your parents making it all work there in beautiful Jackson Hole. There's sort of a theme on the show too of people who are now great trail runners who also have the background that you do and the pedigree that you do of like racing track and cross country collegiately, but who grew up in a mountainous environment and an outdoorsy family where they were exposed to trails and mountains. Was that sort of the case for you? Does it make sense in retrospect how you ended up being such a great trail runner?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think it has everything to do with the way that I was raised. Like, it always kind of makes me laugh because people in the track world are always like, oh, like, how did you get into trail? And I kind of look at it and I'm like, how did I get into trail? It's more like how to get into track. Like, that's the weird one, like that I like to run on flat ground in circles. Like, yeah, that fulfills me in a lot of ways. But the real reason like I fell in love with running in the first place was definitely training on trails. And I was fortunate that we could do that from school too. So like middle school and high school, when I was training, we would go up into the national park and run around Jenny Lake or run up and down Snow King, which is like right next to the schools. Yeah, I think it's sort of a funny progression, but trail definitely instilled the love for running for me.
So then how did you get into track? Maybe tell us a little bit about your experience with running growing up, how you ended up at the University of Washington, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the avenue that like our system has in just in professional running. Like you said, there's a lot of trail runners who start out with track and with cross country. And it's a team environment. So it's super fun when you're young to be a part of that. And yeah, I still love that aspect of it. I think it's amazing to have training partners who are just like clicking off repeats with. But yeah, I think there's two different sides of me that are fed by the two different sides of running that I do.
Mm-hmm. So then how did you end up moving out to Seattle? Because, obviously you're probably getting recruited. It's a Division I school. It means you were probably pretty successful in high school. So how'd you end up moving out west? And tell me a little bit about your collegiate racing career. And, talk to me like I'm 2 years old, because I really don't pay attention to track and cross country, both the collegiate or the professional levels. It's one of the few sports that I don't really monitor. So I'd love to hear just sort of like how you ended up going there and what your career was like.
Yeah, I actually didn't start out at Washington, which is a fun fact not everyone knows about me. So I graduated high school. I did have a couple of really good results at the end of my senior year. And so I was fortunate enough to be recruited to a couple of bigger schools. I did look at University of Washington. I also looked at Oregon and almost went there, but then decided to go to Brown instead in Rhode Island. So I ended up going to Brown for a year and a half, and I never put on a singlet while I was there. I never raced for them. I got hurt like 2 weeks into my freshman year with like the first actual running injury, and honestly, like the primary running injury I've ever had. And it ended up taking me out for like almost 2.5 years. So I kind of had this weird like start to my college career. And I like had to reevaluate a lot. Like, do I actually want to run? Like, where does this fit in my life? What is important to me? Like, what do I want to do with my life? And I ended up deciding on, yeah, like I do really want to run. And I I had discussed going to Oregon with Marisa Powell. And since the time that I had been at Brown, she had moved from Oregon to Washington. And I had liked that school a little bit better. And I thought Seattle might be a little bit better of a place for me to live. And yeah, I decided to transfer. And she brought me onto the team 10 days after I called her the first time. So it was a total whirlwind of events, but I ended up out in Seattle at Washington.
So what made you feel like you couldn't resuscitate your career at Brown? Was it a cultural thing, or did you miss living out west, or were there bad memories from the injury and the subsequent, sort of like feeling that you were maybe separated from your running career? Or what made you want to transfer?
Yeah, I think it was a number of things. Definitely just not super happy. Like, I really enjoyed school there, but I think it was hard to start off on not my best foot. And I kind of needed like a fresh start. I was just a little bit stuck in a rut, didn't know how to kind of write my career without like a really big change. And also like, yeah, I really miss the West. I found out that I belong in the West and I need mountains and I need like access to public lands. And I was definitely just struggling with that a little bit. Because yeah, Wyoming to Rhode Island is a huge change that I thought I wanted. But then as soon as I was there, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I had no idea what I was getting myself into. So
my wife and I joke about that all the time. We're like, man, how do people live east of like Colorado? Right. And, obviously big respect to all of our listeners who, occupy the Midwest or the South or the Northeast or whatever. It's great. But man, living out West is amazing, especially when you grow up here. It makes it really difficult to adjust to a different geography and a different landscape. What was the injury, out of curiosity?
I tore my peroneus longus in my foot. So it was like basically on the bottom of my foot. And they didn't want to do surgery. So it took a long time to diagnose it. And yeah, it was not ideal. I think it would have healed pretty fast if I had immediately known exactly what it was, but it took us a while to pinpoint. So I ended up taking more time off, and then the more time off I took, the weaker it got. And I retore the thing like so many times. It was so frustrating.
So there's also kind of a theme on the show for those who have raced collegiately, that they're a little bit jaded by their collegiate career. They look back at it with less than positive memories in a lot of cases. And for a lot of our guests, that's meant that they've sort of given up on running for a time in their 20s before they sort of discover trail running and then sort of reignite their love. Again, without knowing much about your career and about collegiate track racing in general, how would you assess your collegiate career? Was it successful? Was it happy? Was it positive? Was it negative? How do you feel about it?
Well, I think the part up to where I've told you about, probably if it had ended there, I would have said it was terrible and that I had a horrible experience. But fortunately, I went on to actually have a really good time for a few years too. So it completely took a turn for the better. And I think overall, I had a really good time at Washington. Like, there was definitely still a lot of like struggling that I went through and a lot of like learning, and I had to grow up, and figuring out how to race collegiate cross country was something I feel like I never actually figured out. Like, I think the best I did at cross country was like 64th in the country, which is not good compared to where my track times put me, or like where my trail results put me. So definitely still some struggling, lots of unfinished business, which is why I'm still racing track, because I'm not done yet. But yeah, overall, I would say I had a fairly positive experience.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's come back around and talk about the continuation of the track ambitions in a second. I recall I followed you on Instagram after the Rut VK last year. That was sort of when I discovered who Anna Gibson was. And again, we met each other at Broken Arrow this year. And I know you did the USA Mountain Champs in 2021, but maybe tell us about where the inspiration came from, to really move into the trails more intentionally, especially when you were in the thick of your collegiate racing career.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard balance to find. I was like fiending to race trails, but also, the priority when you're in school is to be ready for cross country season and not be hurt when you show up at school in the fall. So I always sort of had to keep a lid on it until I had like a little bit of success. And then I was like, okay, I actually need to chase this like a little bit more. There's a little more urgency here. Which is sort of where like last year I like kind of bought more into having like an actual trail season. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that, when you're getting close to the end of your collegiate racing career, you kind of need to think ahead, what's next, right? And so you obviously have optionality. You could go full steam into trail. You could continue with, the track racing scene professionally. And so at that point, was it sort of experimentation? Like, let's try this trail thing out to see if it's something that I do want to pursue while I'm still in college and while I'm thinking about the future?
well, definitely. And like, yeah, like you said, having sort of like a little bit longer of a focus, the system that running is in right now, like it pushes you towards choosing. It's like you need to do track or you need to do trail. And some trail athletes like definitely do a lot of road racing as well. So not to discredit that, but like they're different worlds and that's the way that the system is set up. And so, as a young person in college, you're like, okay, I guess I have to like figure out which one I like the most. And everyone kept asking me, well, like, what are you going to do professionally? What are you going to do after college? And so I was like, okay, I guess I need to do both in order to figure out which one I like the most. And then I kind of got to this space where I was like, geez, I'm never going to be able to decide.
Uh,
Like, I guess I'll just keep doing both until it doesn't work anymore. And I'm fortunate to still be in that situation.
did you have to persuade your coach at UW that this was going to be a positive thing for you, or did you have autonomy during the off season to go pursue trail adventures as your heart desired?
The autonomy increased as the years went on. Like, I think at first it was definitely an experiment and I was rebelling a little bit. But then I would show up at school and I'd work really hard and I'd run well and contribute to my team. And I think that we sort of came to an understanding like, okay, as long as this is like working for everyone, like I can run on the trails and I can race in the summers and everyone's happy.
Yeah, cool. All right, so let's talk about the trail team and maybe we'll come back around and talk a little bit more about this transition because you're sort of in the middle of an amazing life transition now, even if it's not completely obvious to you in your youth. These are important moments in our lives and I think we should spend time talking about it. We talked about the trail team a bunch over this past weekend, but for those who didn't watch the stream, maybe explain what the trail team is, how you came to be connected and how it's helped you as an athlete, especially in this transition moment.
Yeah. The trail team is new this year. It's basically the way I would describe it is just a network and a community. And I think it's taken a lot of different renditions and had like a lot of different directions, even just during the time that I've been a part of it. But yeah, it's been really cool. It was started by Andy Wacker, and basically there's like two different levels the way that it's set up right now. And this is more of like a structural thing where there's like 6 of us who are on the trail team, and then there's the trail team club, which has a bunch of other like awesome athletes who are involved.
Mm.
But to be honest, like none of that has been super present like in real life. I think it's just like a group of people who all are like brought under this umbrella, and we just are a network. We like communicate. We've stayed in houses together, thanks to Andy Wacker's organization, and have just gotten to be friends and like help each other out, figure out what events to go to. It's been cool.
So, obviously you're having a great season, which we'll talk about. Mika also had sort of a breakthrough run last weekend at Mammoth Trail Fest. Sam Hendry's been on a tear. Christian Allen won Speed Goat. He was second at Challenge Stellina. So like the success sort of speaks for itself only in year one of this trail team phenomenon. And of course, the mentors are star-studded group, not only Andy Wacker, but Allie Mack, Grayson Murphy, Adam Peterman. So you have sort of like this, roster of world champions that you can draw inspiration and education from. Is there anything in particular that you've picked up from those mentors, people like Andy, Adam, Grayson, Allie, that has rubbed off on you that maybe you want to implement into your own career?
Well, that's a good question. I think they've all been like involved with different members of the trail team in different ways. So, yeah, I mean, like, I think Grayson, I haven't like interact with her a ton, specifically under the trail team situation, but just as like a person and as a friend, like she inspires me. Obviously, like she has a history doing track and trails concurrently, which is what I'm doing. So I think that's pretty cool. And like, yeah, getting to know Allie Mack a little bit through it has been awesome. Obviously now she's like someone who I'm racing with regularly. So it's been cool, like getting to know her and just, yeah, it's basically just like having the conversation starter has been awesome.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well then this is a good segue to talk about the trail and track simultaneous path, because it is, I think, novel in today's day and age of specialization. But maybe before we get to that, we should talk about Brooks, because it feels like they're important in this dual track path that you're taking. So maybe just, talk about this partnership. It's obviously headquartered where you went to school in Seattle. So I don't know if that's part of how things materialized, but tell us how it materialized and why you felt like Brooks was the right fit for you in this next chapter.
Yeah. I mean, I like that you brought this in because Brooks is like the whole reason why I'm able to do what I'm doing. So yeah, huge shout out to Brooks for seeing the potential in me as like just a runner and not as like trail runner or track runner, but all of it. That relationship started pretty recently, actually, like right at the end of my college career. I actually had a really bad race at NCAA outdoor track. And I got connected with Garrett Heath there. And he was originally, I think, entering this conversation like, yo, we should talk about you running the 1500 for Brooks. And then we sat down and like very quickly we were like, okay, this conversation has taken such a turn. We like totally connected for trails because he's on the trail team at Brooks and also involved in the track world. So he totally like is, he's like just in that duality that I'm like trying to be in. So he was like, okay, let's keep this conversation going. And from that point forward, like, 5 days later, I was at Broken Arrow and raced really well there. And then, things were just like happening super fast. And it was just kind of always like an obvious answer for me. Like Brooks is just the one. Like there's such good people behind the brand. And I knew a couple of the athletes on the trail team and on the track team. And I just felt really good about it. So that was not a hard decision for me.
I think they've done a really good job with their athlete strategy and their just posture and disposition within the running world, just, with their run happy philosophy and just the individuals who they identify are walking representations of that philosophy. I think they've done a really good job. Say more about Garrett Heath, because people may not know that name, but he's a shred beast. He was like, obviously a professional road and track. He was a great cross country runner from memory. And now he's working in sports marketing. So you're talking about how you're interfacing with him to figure out the ins and outs of your contract and how you might, devote your energies in this next chapter of your career. But him having that experience of being a professional athlete, now working on the other side of the table in sports marketing, does it feel like that's helped, that he has empathy and understanding of what professional athletes go through?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. It's like he's just advocating for like whatever's best. It's like obviously it's a give and take between a company and an athlete, but like ultimately I think he like really understands that what's best for the athlete is what's best for the company. And so he's just like working really hard at Brooks to, just make everything as good as possible. And his experience as a professional athlete definitely made me take a lot of confidence in just what he was bringing to the table as like the sports marketing guy at Brooks. Huge confidence in that. And I think everyone on the team has been so thrilled with him being in that position.
Did you have an agent? I don't know if that's a personal question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but I'm just curious because, like a lot of the professional runners who go into the road and track circuit engage an agent first thing, but it's rare that trail athletes engage agents, at least in this current era of the sport. There's a few exceptions to that, but are you willing to answer that question?
Yeah. I mean, I had no idea what I was doing coming out of college, and especially like entering a new space with a contract that I didn't know if what I wanted actually existed in like professional running. And so, yes, I had an agent work with me for the contract and with Brooks.
Well, that's why I was kind of asking, because this is so new to have somebody straight out of college, being a multi-focused ambassador of a brand, right? Who doesn't necessarily fit into a single box and therefore a single budget, right? Like you're not going straight into the track budget. You're not going straight into the trail budget. And I don't know if this is something you can provide some clarity on too, but I know I've heard in other places, can't remember where, that Brooks was like very focused and committed to like growing their exposure in trail specifically. I think it was like their CMO or somebody who said that they were committed to spending equally on both the categories, which is a revolutionary thing, as somebody who's made my career in trail running, to have one of those big brands make that type of commitment. It's super exciting. So that's why I was sort of curious about the agent thing, because the agent would have to know a little bit about both the sports too, and know how to navigate the bureaucracy and budgets of these larger brands. So maybe tell us a little bit about like how you envision things evolving from here on out, road versus track versus trail, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, I feel super excited about it because I think there's just like room to grow wherever I want to go. Like right now I'm operating with this model of wanting to do both and seeing as far as I can get doing both. And I think I have like a lot of untapped potential on the track and on the trails. So I'm really excited to like explore that. But I think, ultimately, yeah, will I decide? Potentially. I think like at some point I might decide that I love one more than the other, or I'm just having a better experience with one over the other. And I think the great thing about Brooks is that I feel really supported. Like I feel like they would be, they'd be stoked about whatever I decide to chase. And so, I think it's a really, really unique and really cool position to be in.
Yeah. And it's almost like, one season might be devoted towards a certain category, and the next season might be almost like Ninka Brinkman right now, right? Like she's focused on the Paris Olympics, running the marathon for the Netherlands, but she's also one of the best trail runners in the world. And so maybe after the Olympics, she comes back and, starts ripping Sierras and all, et cetera again. So anyway, just super exciting. And I think you should feel proud and excited to be on this cutting edge, this leading edge of this new generation, and taking your skills across every discipline of running. It's really exciting. So before
that's part of it too. Like I hope that I am, I hope that like in 5 years, maybe my situation is not so unique. Like I don't want to be the standout, like, oh, this person did this weird thing. Like, yeah, I hope it's just normal. Like, I think we should stop, telling people like that they have to choose one or the other, because I actually think they're extremely complementary.
Yeah, it's a good point. And we were saying on the broadcast or during one of our streams that you joined us on this past weekend, I think somebody asked you about whether you were receiving inbound from your former teammates, like getting texts from people who are wondering about this new path ahead for you and getting trail curious, et cetera. So anyway, super exciting. So I want to talk a bit, obviously, about your season this year, because it's been awesome. And I've been happily following from a distance and in person when I've had the opportunity. But first, I think it's important to just kind of like talk about your training, because again, this is a moment of transition for you. You said that you're working with David Roche now, who I think very highly of, and I'd love to hear, how you two came to be connected, what's similar and what's different from your collegiate track racing.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a huge transition. I think just the end of, an era with one coach and the start of another. Just because for me, like my coach has always played a huge role in my life. Like in high school, my coach was like, yeah, just a huge, like I looked up to him so much, and I still do. Like he's still one of my best friends. We talk like almost most days, to be honest. So yeah, really strong relationship there. I had a really close relationship with my college coach. And so going into the transition, that was a huge priority to me. And I had just heard amazing things about David and Megan. And ultimately, I just ended up reaching out, and it was like, if nothing else, they'll be amazing advisors. Like they'll help me figure out where to go and what to do. And like, they're people who I could just go to with questions anytime. And I like immediately just felt so supported by them both. Like they were hyping me up so hard, saying stuff on this phone, like first phone call with them. I was like, you're literally crazy. Like, I don't know why you believe in me so much, but yeah, just things that like maybe I did need to hear, that like no one else was going to be brave enough to say to me about what they think I'm capable of achieving, and how I can get there. And so, yeah, I took a ton of confidence in starting to work with David. And it's been a huge transition for me. I think just like very different coaching style than I'm used to, but I'm entering a new space that's super different as well. And I think it's been functioning great for me in terms of racing. So I'm really pleased with it so far.
So go deeper on that. What is different? Give us an example and sort of like draw the contrast between what you were doing only a few months ago versus what you're doing under the Roche tutelage.
Yeah. I mean, biggest thing, like obviously in college, I'm showing up to training every single day and my coach has eyes on me. And like, she would literally sometimes look at me and be like, you're tired, you're not working out today, or like, you're being dramatic, or you didn't sleep well last night, or whatever. Like, she just would look at me and know that. And so I think the transition, just to being with like a coach that's a remote situation, I was not sure about. I was like, I don't know that that's going to work for me. But it has worked so like really well so far. And I think college taught me how to figure out how I'm feeling and figure out what I need. And, I don't need to like have someone else necessarily weighing in all the time. Like, it's actually good, I think, to be a little bit more independent, be like, yeah, I am tired today, and actually recognize that, be like, maybe I shouldn't work out yet or whatnot.
Yeah. I just followed you on Strava like an hour ago, and I was just like looking through some of your training, and I want to come back to what we started our conversation with the mixture of activities that you're passionate about. But like, I just saw, I think it was yesterday or something, where you did like a 5 by 90, 60, 30-second interval session. So maybe using that as an example, like, is that different from what you were doing in college? And what's the specific application of that workout in particular?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's super different than what I was doing in college. Just because, well, in college, I actually, during my entire time, I never did a workout on trails. Like, I was working out with my team. We'd run on grass. We'd run on like gravel loops that are like super wide, and I'd run on the track. And that was pretty much where my training happened. And in the summers, I would like run up mountains for fun on my own program, do whatever I felt like doing. But like, I've never before working with David actually done a workout on a trail. And so I think that's a huge part of the transition. And
brilliant coaching, by the way, brilliant coach. Do workouts on trails. Yes.
Yeah. That's why I'm like, lots of untapped potential here. Like, we have no idea what's going to happen when I actually train for this thing. Yeah. So big transition there, but I think, yeah, it's just fun to explore. It's like a new chapter. I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah. So again, last weekend we were talking, and I think you said that you run like 3 or 4 days a week. You do your workouts, you do a long run, but that otherwise you're getting a lot of volume on the bike. So again, coming back to where we started our conversation, in broad strokes, just paint the picture for the audience of what your training looks like in a normal week and how you balance the different activities and what value each of them bring into your run performance at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think that's something also that actually has been consistent for me between college and now. Like, I am still running just a few days a week. And the rest of my volume, like you said, is like, it's on the bike, or if it's the winter, it's on skis. And yeah, I think I found a lot of success with that. Like, when I would normally have a recovery day and any regular training plan that would normally involve running, I just make it a bike ride or a ski instead. And I think like mentally it keeps me sharp. Like, I just don't get tired of running. Like, every day when I start running, I'm excited to be doing it because I wasn't maybe doing it yesterday. And I think, yeah, I also love biking so much, and I love skiing so much. It's just feels like fun. Like, I kind of forget that I'm actually training, even though it plays a huge role in that volume.
Do you ever get insecure about it though? Because like, again, I think this is a really exciting moment in the sport, and there's athletes that you can point to who are successful with just such crazy different training styles. But it's not unusual to feel self-conscious when you see somebody putting up just like heroic run numbers, right? Doing 120, 140, 160-mile weeks, thinking of some of my friends who do UTMB and who are racing at the top of the sport. And simultaneously, you have other people at the other end of the spectrum, like yourself, who are doing, a lot of overall volume, but the run volume is nothing intimidating, right? If you're putting up 30 or 40 miles a week. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say there about like the psychological part of it, the competitive part of it, and, whether or not you ever get self-conscious about, putting up bigger numbers.
I think that's a good question. This is a millennial thing to say, but I feel like it's like, cool flex, bro. Like, I don't care that you're running X amount of miles per week. Like, that doesn't make me feel like you're training more effectively than I am, Like, I see my friends who are putting up a lot of mileage, and mileage to me is not, it's not the right metric to measure whether someone's training is more effective than mine. Like, the metrics are like, yeah, overall volume. And are you having a good time? Are you healthy? Like, are your race results good? Like, I don't think that me running a bunch more mileage would actually make me a better runner. Like, I think it's just going to burn me out over time and make the whole model less sustainable, and maybe just make my life like a lot more mundane. I just want to be like stimulated and having a good time. And so, yeah, I think I used to show up, especially at track events, and be like, oh, like, I don't know what I'm doing. How could I possibly match up to this girl who's running 80 miles a week? But I'm like so past that point. I just take confidence in what I'm doing.
Yeah. So maybe most important question of the podcast. Are you actually a millennial? Because I'm pretty sure I'm a millennial and I'm way older than you. I'm pretty sure you're a different generation at this point.
I think, yeah, I'm Gen Z, right?
Yeah, I think you're Gen Z.
I'm a 99 baby. I'm sort of near the junction, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I'm an old millennial. So who knows? Maybe we are part of the same generation. I'll hang on to that, bit of youth, thinking that you and I are both millennials together. So talking specifically about your season now, again, we met each other at Broken Arrow. You shredded the VK, won it, got second in the 23K behind Allie Mack, world champ, trail team mentor, Allie Mack. So, probably a big confidence boosting way to sort of make your way into the sport. And I think from memory, didn't you race NCAAs like the weekend before?
I did.
All right. So just like explain that whole week, because I think it's representative of what we're talking about, of this being like a moment of profound transition for you. And that week was sort of like a concentrated example of that.
That week was honestly insane. And honestly, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. It was crazy. I went to NCAAs and I had a pretty bad run in the first round. So I didn't end up making it into the final. And I was really bummed out about it. So it was kind of like a sore spot. And traveled back home to Seattle, and like 2 or 3 days later, I was on my way down to Broken Arrow, and I drove down to Tahoe. So that was like another added thing. But I'd had Broken Arrow on the calendar for so long, and I was looking forward to it so much. It's like, if nothing else, maybe I'll go and get my butt kicked, and it will be a terrible race. But if nothing else, like, I'll just have a good time. And I had a bunch of friends, so I was excited to see there. So I sent it and completely shocked myself with like how strong I felt on the trails off of just exclusively track training. And hardly even having trail run. But I will say afterwards, there was like a lot of carnage. Like, my body was not ready for that stimulus. I was really, really tired and like didn't feel normal for probably like almost 2.5 weeks. Yeah. And I turned a corner like right before US Nationals on the track, which I then was able to race well. But yeah, it was crazy. Don't recommend.
So it makes me want to ask a little bit more about that like emotional feeling too, because like maybe you're ending your collegiate career in a little bit of a disappointing note. Like you just mentioned, the final race wasn't quite what you wanted, but then there is excitement oftentimes inherent in moments of transformation, even if it's only obvious in retrospect. And maybe these great performances at Broken Arrow were a reflection of the inspiration inherent in this transition. Am I touching on anything there that you want to expand on?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think also just the end of the college career, that's like terrifying on one hand, but so exciting on the other. And by that point, I had decided I wanted to run professionally. And so I sort of just was excited to try out whatever, and was like letting the wind take me a little bit. Like, I had this sense of just like freedom, and if I wanted to go to Broken Arrow, I could go to Broken Arrow. Like, there was no college coach telling me I couldn't go. And so I think that was just sort of a it was almost like when you move out of your parents' house, you're like, oh, like you just go crazy for a second. And that was my experience with Broken Arrow.
Oh, that's so awesome. So then tell us a little bit about the USA champs, because what, you were 10th there, 1500 meters, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's
And this
correct.
was just after you signed your professional contract with Brooks. So, I mean, you've sort of been on a heater since then. I know you got injured, which I want to talk about next, but maybe just meditate on that performance at USA champs and, especially, in contrast with what you were able to achieve at Broken Arrow. It, I mean, obviously shows your versatility.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually showed up to USA's with a pretty similar attitude. Like, okay, this year's been kind of insane, and I had a great race at Broken Arrow. Like, I just signed my pro contract. I knew that. No, other people didn't know that yet, but yeah, it sort of felt like a bonus round. Like I would love to run super well, but if I don't, I've already accomplished a lot of cool stuff in the past month, and I have a pro career ahead of me. It's all going to be okay. And I think that like liberating feeling of just feeling really free. There's not a lot hanging over your head when you like get on the start line. That was like where the magic kind of happened for me.
And it's so true, isn't it? I mean, as somebody so young, it's a good realization to have, right? Just like that spirit of freedom and that spirit of I'm happy to be here and that spirit of I got nothing to lose. That's when you actually can race to your potential. And it's when you have the baggage, when you're scared about the security of your contract, when you're like nervous returning from injury or something like that, where you're just like frustrated with your running. So aligning the emotional and the physical is what it's all about. Integration.
Oh yeah.
Speaking of which, let's talk about your injury, the physical and the emotional, right? Like you revealed to me at least at Mammoth Trail Fest. I don't know if you were talking about it publicly, but that you got hurt after Broken Arrow and USA's, and that you pretty much were on the shelf for much of the summertime. Obviously, since then you've returned to racing. You've been on a tear, so you've been sort of continuing this great run of success. So I'm sure people would love to hear sort of what the injury was, number one, but how you spent that period of injury, like what you did in that time that made your return to running so successful.
Yeah. I've actually been reflecting on this a lot. I think I maybe should have seen the signs of, being pretty worn out and about to get hurt, just with like the turmoil, good and bad, just like the chaos, I guess, of like the last couple months of college. Because I also, one of my parents had an organ transplant, which was super intense. That happened in May. So I was like also going through a lot of like personal life stuff, the pro decision, the end of college, where am I going to live? Like so many questions, and also like had a lot of, like underlying stress about my family and being there for them. So it was a lot, and I'm like not surprised at all looking back that resulted in me being tired and a bit beat up. So I had like cuboid syndrome, which is something I've actually experienced before in my foot. And yeah, I think it's probably related to track spikes and just spending a lot of time running in circles. But yeah, that slowed me down for about 5 weeks. And I spent pretty much all of that time just hammering myself on the bike every single day, which was super fun. Like I said, I sometimes forget it's training. I'm just out like on a bike packing trip in the middle of nowhere with friends, and or just like, yeah, hammering on my little local routes from my house. And I find it really fulfilling even on its own.
So, yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And it's always obvious in retrospect, when we're about to get injured. Unfortunately, it's rarely obvious in the moment. So you did get through it successfully. And it seems like what you were doing during that 5 weeks off led you to this like spectacular late season that you've had. We can sort of skip over Challenge Stellina, but that's sort of like a big sub ultra distance race in Europe that happens like kind of around UTMB time, if I'm not mistaken. Like, let's just kind of skip over that, but you had an awesome race there, and we'll talk about Pikes Peak and then Mammoth, and then sort of look ahead before we close down. So Pikes Peak, man, 3rd place, your first time there, one of the oldest like true mountain races in the world. So much history on that hill, and you were 3rd place behind Sophia Lockley and Judith Wider. So I know that was your yeah, like your first race on the Golden Trail World Series, and you posted I looked at your Strava, you said you wouldn't change a thing about the performance. So obviously you came away satisfied. So I'd love to just kind of hear from your perspective, how it played out, how you feel about the performance, whether you surprised yourself or not, things like that.
Pikes Peak is so sick. That race is so cool. I just had such a good time that whole weekend. And yes, I definitely surprised myself. Like the first couple races back after an injury or some not ideal period of training are always a little scary. And I was fortunate to race well when I was over in Europe, but like to give some context, I I literally biked for 5 weeks, ran for like under 10 days, raced Stellina, recovered for a week, raced 2 more times, and then flew home. And I was like not feeling like myself. I was not running normally. So I showed up to Pikes Peak like, okay, that was a weird experience. Like, I have no idea what's about to happen. And also, it was the longest race I'd done. And so I wasn't sure how fueling was going to go, or how my body was going to react. I've never been to 14,000 before. Like, I'd only been to like mid 13,000 in the Tetons. And so there was a lot of unknowns. And I remember like the night before the race, I was like sitting on my bedroom floor in the Airbnb, like talking to David. And I was like, I don't know, this is kind of scary. Like, I'm pretty scared. And he was like, like, let's just go have fun. Like, you need to be smiling above tree line. That's a big goal. And like, let's go learn as much stuff as we can. So my entire goal was literally just to learn. And somehow everything just went right. Like, I was able to eat, which was cool. And I was able to drink, which was cool. Like, my body actually felt pretty good at altitude. Slowed me down, but it like was fine. And yeah, I think I just sort of ran out of my mind. And it was again that feeling of not having any expectation that I would credit that to.
Say more about the fear thing, because I think that's, I don't know, illuminating as to what we go through as professional athletes, right? Like, is it fear like, hey, I'm racing against the top dogs in the world at the sub ultra distance stuff? Like, this is my first Golden Trail World Series event. Or is it fear of like, oh, I'm going up to 14? Is it a combination of all those things?
I think it's a combination of all those things. Yeah. Like, I don't know. It's just it's a weird feeling. It's an uneasy feeling when you realize that you're at the biggest stage you've ever been on and you're not ready. Or you think you're not ready. You're like, I just don't think that I'm ready for this level of competition. But then, yeah, I guess to find out that maybe you are, and maybe like whatever unconventional crap you did to like get yourself there is actually fine. I think that's why the sport's so addicting. Like, okay, well, then why am I putting so many rules? Like, why does everything have to be a certain way? Like, maybe I should just be flexible and like always just put myself out there and always take risks like this. Like, you never know when it's going to like lead to a breakthrough or just like get you to a new level.
Was it you or David who came up with the just go out there and learn philosophy for that race? Because that feels to me like a profound and important, sort of disposition to bring into that event.
I think it was definitely led by David. And I don't know, like, he believes in me to an insane degree, but I think also it was his way of trying to like lessen the blow of a bad race before it happened, like, well, even if I ran terribly and I ended up like, I don't know, 40th, which I would not have been happy with. Like, I think that he still would have been satisfied with me, and I in turn would have been satisfied with myself if I had learned something. And so it was like, why don't we just bring that focus in just in case, as like a little security blanket? And I think he was just as surprised that it went well as I was.
Yeah. So you said you wouldn't change a thing. Is there anything you did learn in that experience? Because it was your first Golden Trail World Series. We'll talk about Mammoth here in a second, but that's a big stage, and this being the big moment of transition, it is a period of concentrated learning too. Is there anything in particular you picked up on that big hill in Southern Colorado?
Well, I think I said this a little bit, but just, yeah, it's worth it to take risks sometimes. Like, that's why we do what we do.
What was the risk? Did you just you put yourself in the fight? Like,
just running. Yeah. Like, I think showing up was risky. Like, I could have just stayed home and been like, I didn't train for running for 5 weeks. Like, come on. But instead I was like, no, I'm going to be there. Like, I'm going to do it. And even if my name ends up lower on this like results sheet than I want it to be, like, it's still worth it. I think that sort of attitude. And also, yeah, I learned that Golden Trail's super fun. I want to race more. I belong in events like that. And I want to like go shake things up. It's super fun.
Good. All right. Well, perfect segue. Let's talk about Mammoth Trail Fest, another Golden Trail World Series race this past weekend. You finished fourth place in the 26K. It was only 6 days removed from Pikes Peak. Tell us about that sort of quick transition between the two events, how you were feeling physically, mentally, emotionally going into your second Golden Trail World Series event, and, any highlights from the competition itself.
Yeah. I think I had a similar level of uneasiness when I realized how tired I was after Pikes Peak and that I had to race 6 days later. But I took the week really easy. I did a lot of laying around. Like everyone's like, "Oh, what'd you do in Mammoth?" I'm like, "Really nothing." I like laid around. I checked out the course. I raced. But yeah, I think I like came around just in time for the race. And yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from that for me is like, okay, maybe if I'd have done just Pikes Peak, I would have thought I'm really good at running uphill. My body's good at altitude. And like, that's the kind of race that suits me. But I think going and doing it again, and ending up well there too was like, okay, like, yeah, like stop selling yourself short. Like we can also run fast. We can also run 17 miles and like do a totally different type of race. So I think just like a big like confidence boost for the type of events that like I can be competitive in.
Yeah. And do you feel like we'll start talking about the future here in a second, but, piggybacking on what we talked about with Pikes Peak, was there more learning at Mammoth, especially because it is a different style course, all uphill race versus an up down race, a lot of the similar characters that you raced on back-to-back weekends. But racing on back-to-back weekends also is probably an opportunity for learning too. Any things that you picked up in Mammoth?
Oh, I mean, I learned all kinds of stuff. I think I have a lot of room for growth with my nutrition strategies. Like I literally eat applesauce in races, and I think there would be a lot of value in me like learning how to fuel more conventionally. But yeah, I just haven't had that experience yet racing long enough to need to. So I'm excited to learn there. And I think these two races were like, okay, yeah, that's something that I need to work on. Learning that needs to be done for the future. And yeah, I also fell really hard during Mammoth on the way down, like 5 miles from the end of the race. And I had like a learning moment too, where like, yeah, I got up and I was like, I'm not finishing this race. Like, I'm literally broken. My season's over. And then I kept running, which I don't know, maybe was a questionable choice. My ankle still hurts a bit, but I think, yeah, just like when the races get long like that, like you have another level of like suffering and needing to be perseverant and getting up after a hard fall and keeping with it. That was like an element that I haven't really had to experience before.
Nothing like a good tomahawk early in your career to, welcome you, indoctrinate you into the great sport of trail running. And you did get up and brush it off. You finished fourth place in a stellar world-class field. And I'm sure you're feeling really happy with your season right now and probably confident looking ahead, which we should do now before we started, or maybe it was during our conversation. You said you are going to be going to Italy for the Golden Trail World Final. I checked right before we started. You're ranked 15 in the series right now, which is great with only 2 results. Probably most of the women ahead of you have 3, which makes it easier to rank higher in the World Series standings. So tell us about how you're feeling about going and racing internationally again for the second time this season, where your body and mind's at ahead of the Golden Trail World Final next month.
I'm super excited for it. I think that was another thing that I actually, ahead of ahead of Pikes Peak and Mammoth, I was not sure what I was going to do at the end of my season. So having good results at those 2 events confirmed to me that I should go to Italy for the final. And just also all the people that I met over the past like 2 weeks through the Golden Trail series. I think it's just fun to go race with fun people. So decided that that's where I want to end up in October. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it'll be another great learning experience for me.
As is life, every day. Well, I'd be mad at myself if I didn't ask you like what your goals are a little bit longer term. I know we've sort of touched on this a little bit in our conversation, with your dual track method here. But like if you take this season and sort of like contemplate it a little bit, does it impact how you might approach next season or even looking further ahead? Like what are some of your goals in the short, medium, and long term, if you don't mind revealing them?
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to super short term, I'd love to have another good run at the final in Italy. I think beyond that, like I definitely need to train for a little while and I want to transition over back to track. And with the Olympic trials and the Olympics next summer, like track is a big focus for me for the 6 months that follow my trail season, or I guess it's more like 8 months. But then past that point, like I think this year was cool figuring out that I can run VKs and I can run trail events, sub ultra, like right off of track season. I'd love to go into another just another super epic trail season, just like blazing and learn as much as I possibly can. Yeah.
Just go represent the US in the Paris Olympics and then come back and start ripping it up on trails a little bit more.
I think big goal also, like I have sort of scratched the surface. Like I raced well at USA's for track this year and I PR'd by 2 seconds. And I think there's a lot more where that comes from. Just the way that I was training, I felt like I under raced all spring. And so I think just a big goal for me is to drop some seconds off of all of my track times. Like they're just getting a little bit soft.
Okay. So again, I'm ignorant on track stuff, but does some of these trail performances impact how you think about your track capabilities? Because you mostly focus on the 1500, if I'm not mistaken. Does it make you feel like, having done a couple of these 2-hour type events, not like you're going to do a marathon or half marathon, but are you thinking maybe about the 5 and 10K, or, what does the track look like for you?
The 10K, I would say a little bit less so, but I do think like the 5K is for sure within possibility for me. And I've had a lot of people kind of nudge me in that direction. So I'm very open to it. I do love the 1500 and I love the mile, but 5K, I'm not going to say no.
Everybody says the 5K is like the hardest event. I have a good friend, Andrew Bumbelow, who finished fourth. I think he finished fourth in the 5K Olympic trials in like 2012. I think it was him who told me the 5 is brutal because the 15, it's over in a few minutes, and the 10K, it's like slow enough to where, you're not redlining the whole time, but the 5K is like an absolute sufferfest. Is that truth?
Well, I haven't run enough 5Ks to actually be able to tell you the answer to that. So I might have to get back to you.
Okay. Get back to me on that. Again, I'm ignorant, so you got to educate me on that stuff. Well, Anna, man, it's so great to get to know you, and I appreciate you coming on the show. We end with a couple of uniform questions here that I sent you via email. The first one is, who is one person that you admire? Can be inside or outside of sports. Person could be living or dead, and why is it that you admire that person?
Well, my first instinct was like Dylan Bowman, but I'm gonna shift my answer. I think somebody that really has inspired me in the last couple of years with my career and just as a person is Lachlan Morton, who is probably not a person that a lot of listeners on this show know of, but he's an Australian cyclist. I highly recommend typing that name into YouTube and watching some videos. Lachlan's just sick. I think he just takes a really creative approach to being a professional athlete, and he does a bunch of like monster, just insane ultra bike packing events and routes and rides. And I love how he's just like so truly himself, like just so authentic, and has broken down a lot of barriers in like the professional cycling world. And so I think I'm really inspired by that. And if any part of me is like anything like him in that regard in the running world, like I'm stoked.
It's a brilliant answer. It's funny. My brother just texted me, hey, you got to get Lachlan Morton on your podcast. And for our listeners, I bet a lot of people are familiar with him, but he's almost like the Ricky Gates equivalent in trail running, like kind of an artistic, creative individual who, like you said, marches to the beat of his own drum and comes up with a lot of, crazy adventures in the same way that Ricky did his Transamericana adventure and his Every Single Street adventure. So anyway, great answer, Lachlan Morton. And if anybody's listening who's got a connection, please feel free to put us together. I'd love to have him on the show.
That would be amazing. That should happen.
Yeah. Final question for you, Anna. what is one truth that you've learned about yourself or about life in general through your experience as an athlete?
I thought about this actually for quite a while before I landed on an answer. Very thought-provoking question. And what I've come to is community. I think that's just like the central pillar of what I want my experience as an athlete and as a person to be. Like, I think what is even the value of all of this stuff that we're all doing if it's not like shared with other people, whether that's like firsthand, making friends, racing with people, doing what you're doing, connecting people, sharing stories, or like secondhand, just sharing those experiences and inspiring other people. I feel like community is just like the centerpiece, and sport is the reason that I feel like that, because I've gotten so much of my own community in my life, like from this space.
My entire community is through sport. It's amazing. It's another brilliant, beautiful answer and a great place to wind down our conversation. Anna, congratulations on everything you've achieved in this very early moment in your career. It's a special transition moment, as we've been talking about. I hope you can savor it and stay healthy and motivated. Best of luck to you over in Italy at the World Final next month, and keep the good vibes coming. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.